guys, it's Sarah, and today I want to start a little bit of a series of videos for you. These are going to be recommendation videos. And I guess I kind of give recommendations quite often, even if I'm not calling them recommendations. I do talk about the books that I've read, but I wanted to do like kind of genre specific recommendations for you guys. And I'm going to pick a genre. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 different recommendations from 3 different age levels of books. So I'm going to give you 3 middle grade, 3 young adult, and 3 adult recommendations from each genre. And I just thought this would be kind of something fun to give you some more ideas on books, some things that I have read and loved. Some of these you'll probably have heard of quite a bit because they've been some of my favorites. Some of them maybe you haven't, that I've read a while ago that I don't talk about very often. And so I'm going to try to keep it a little bit like that instead of just giving you the same books I talk about all the time, because that can get very redundant. But I wanted to go ahead and get started on this series for you. And the first genre we're going to tackle is historical fiction. I like historical fiction. I like World War II historical fiction, which definitely I think would be the highest saturated area of historical fiction that floods the market. Definitely, I think that time period is very, very popular. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot of different countries you can cover because World War II, like a lot of different countries were involved and were affected and were impacted by it. And there's just a lot there that you can dive into. So I do have some that are set in World War II, but not all of them. And I definitely, as far as historical fiction goes, would like to cover some other time periods as well, and maybe some other places that World War II affected that you don't hear a whole lot about. I would like to discover some of those books too. So if you have any recommendations, let me know down below for sure. But here are some in the 3 different age groups that are historical fiction that I have read and loved. I'm going to start with middle grade. The first one is The War That Saved My Life. This is by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. And this follows a young girl and her brother, and they are living in London with their mother. Their mother is very abusive, and there are some scenes towards the beginning of the book with them living with their mother that are hard to read, especially I would say for a middle grade reader, but even as an adult, it was hard for me to read as well. And the main character has a clubfoot, and her mother basically treats her like she is nothing because of it, and that it's, something that is going to hold her back for the rest of her life, and she's worth nothing because of it. And so it's just a very, very toxic household, right? So World War II hits, and the time period that this is set in is when there are trains that ran from London to the English countryside, and the government said that children need to get on these trains and they're going to be taken out of London because London is going to be a big target for the Germans to try to occupy, and they want the children to be safe. This really happened. So they would gather children, put them on trains, send them to the English countryside. Families in the English countryside would go to the train stations, pick out children, and then take them home and care for them for the time being. And our brother and sister end up on a train, and they go to the English countryside, but nobody wants them, mainly because of her foot. And so they have a hard time finding somewhere to live. A woman does end up taking them in reluctantly, and you see them acclimating to her. You see her acclimating to them, and you just kind of see where all that blossoms. This book was so heartbreaking, but so beautiful at the same time. It really was a sense of found family. And even though it took place during a wartime, it was full of hope, and it was just absolutely stunning. And there is a follow-up to this book as well that I have not read yet, but I do have it on my shelves and I would like to. So yeah, but that one was just so good. The next one for middle grade I have is Echo. This is by Pam Muñoz Ryan. This one follows a young boy who is in a forest. It's actually kind of a forbidden forest. He really shouldn't be there, but he finds himself there anyway. And he comes across these 3 sisters. And he ends up in the middle of a prophecy. And it involves a quest and a harmonica. And I don't want to get into the details of it because the details were really cool the way that they came about. So, but know that it has it's very musically heavy in this one as well because of the harmonica. And then decades later, you are following 3 people who also find themselves entwined with this same harmonica. And they are all 3 of them dealing with some things in their lives that they need some help with. And this harmonica is kind of a pivotal point for all 3 of them. So you see the connections there as well. And this one, I would say, if you listen to audiobooks, please listen to this on audio because you're going to get the music and it's really cool. Like, this is one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. And just having that musical aspect in my ear really helped the story come to life for me. And yeah, it was a great story. And the last one for middle grade I want to talk about is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. This is by John Boyne. Now, this one could be a little bit more on the upper middle grade, almost into young adult, I would say. I think sometimes it can be sectioned as middle grade, sometimes it can be sectioned as young adult. So it's a little bit on the higher aspect of it. But this one follows a young boy whose father works for Hitler during World War II. And you're getting the viewpoint from this child, and he is a child. He doesn't fully understand it. He doesn't understand the war. He doesn't know what his father does. And you are getting his viewpoint and talking with his family members and his sisters and his friends. And him and his family are moved to this new place that he can't even pronounce. And he just knows that they're there because of his father's job. And so he ends up on the outskirts of where they live, and there's this really big fence. And then he comes across this boy who's on the other side of the fence, and this boy has on striped pajamas. And they start talking, and they start sharing some of their experiences. And they have to kind of keep it a little bit secret because when people start noticing that they're both gravitating towards this fence, they're trying to keep them separate, right? And the most interesting thing about this was getting the viewpoint from the little boy because he did not understand anything. And oh man, you guys, this book towards the end just had me. It had me. And oh man, it was a lot. Okay, moving into the young adult age range, the first one I want to talk about is Salt to the Sea. This is by RUTA SEPETYS. This is, again, another World War II. And this one is actually following 5 different people. And so each chapter is a different perspective. And the perspectives are very diverse, which I really, really liked. The chapters are very short, and I mean sometimes 1 or 2 pages, which was really nice. So it kind of helped me get through the book really quickly. I think I read through this book in 2 days, easy. I couldn't put it down. And you're following these people. Most of them are a group of people who are meeting up, and they are traveling because they are trying to get to this ship that is taking refugees away. And they heard about this ship. They want to get on it because there's literally war all around them. Getting different perspectives from different people of different ages, of different countries and nationalities, and how they're affected by the war. And you're, seeing them kind of all come together and what's happening on that. And it actually follows a real tragedy that happened in the sea where this ship is attacked and destroyed with all these refugees on it. And it's something that actually happened in history and was covered up. So it's very interesting. But yeah, that book was fantastic. And the next one for young adult is a really, really popular book that I have read and that I would like to eventually reread at some point. I want to revisit the story, but that is The Book Thief by Markus ZUSAK. This is probably one of the most popular books out there in recent history. And this follows a young girl who is living with her family, and this is in the middle of World War II again. And her and her family end up taking in some Jewish people, and that's, they're having to keep that very secret because that's not allowed. And she really sees the community around her start to change, and she notices that the Germans are trying to burn books. and like ban books and burn them, and like literally destroying them in the streets. And she does not like this because books are refuge for her. So like that's her escapism, and she loves books and she loves stories. And so she goes on a mission to try to save these books, and she has to do that very secretly by stealing them. And she can't be caught because they would literally kill her. And so she's trying to save these books and make sure that other people have access to them as well. And all the while, there are people living in her house that she's trying to protect too. And so it's a whole big struggle type thing. And the coolest thing about this story is that it is told in the narration of death, which is really interesting because there's literally death happening all around her, including some of these books. Some of these books are dying right in front of her face. And so the narration part of it is really, really cool. Like it's just very unique. And it's definitely a story that I want to get back to. At some point, I would like to do a reread of this one. It's been a long time since I've read it, but at some point I will reread this book. But yeah, it was really good. The last one for young adult is one of my favorite books from last year. It was in my top 10. And this one is like, I struggle to say that it's a young adult book, but that's how it's categorized. Like that's where it is in the bookstores. That's how it is on Amazon. It's teen and young adults. And I'm like, okay. To me, it didn't feel like that. It felt like an adult book. So I'm still kind of struggling a little bit with the target audience, I guess, if you will, because to me, it felt like an adult book. Like if I went to the bookstore, I would look for it in adult, but it's not there. It's in YA. But I don't make those types of decisions. I don't get paid for that, so it's fine. But this one is Lovely War by Julie Berry. And this one follows a World War I timeline. And there's also a timeline that is in World War II also, but the World War I is the main timeline that we're in. And we are following a couple of young couples who are falling in love during a time of war. And you see how these couples meet and how they try to maintain their relationship, and, you know, along with everything that is happening around them as well. The coolest thing about this book is that it is told through Greek gods like Ares and Athena, and I think Hades is in there at some point. Like there's a bunch of Greek gods that are telling the story, and it's kind of like a mock trial type thing. It's really cool the way that it happens. And you see them telling these stories and how these stories were unfolding, and you see their influence in these people's lives. And even though they're not supposed to be interfering, but they still do. And so you're kind of getting cutscenes from what the Greek gods are saying and what they're telling them, and like scenes with them together. And then you're also getting the actual scenes played out in real life. And it's so cool the way that it was written. It was so unique. I've never read anything like that before. And I loved every page of it. I really, really did. This one, another reason that I struggle with the young adult thing is because there are some intense, graphic, violent war scenes in here. There's one in particular that I can still see in my head. It's very detailed, and it's in the middle of like a battle, on the battle scene in the war. And so it's a lot. So maybe high young adult, if you will, but the story is beautiful and the way it unfolds is beautiful. And it had me like laughing, and it had me tearing up, and just, I loved every page of it. It was so entertaining for me, and it's one of my favorite books. Okay, let's go with some adult historical fiction. The first one I want to recommend is a Stephen King book. Hear me out. Now, when you think of Stephen King, you don't think of historical fiction, right? You think of like Misery and Carrie and It and all these books that are completely, horror books. But he also wrote a book called 11/22/63, which is a historical fiction book with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in because there is some time travel. Now we follow our main character who realizes and accidentally ends up time traveling. He doesn't know that time travel is a thing. He doesn't realize that that is what is about to start happening to him. And he time travels, and he ends up in the 1960s And he realizes that he is there right before JFK is assassinated in Dallas. And he meets Lee Harvey Oswald. So he knows who this person is, right? Like, he knows who he is. He knows what he's going to do. And he is left with a decision of, do I try to stop this? Do I try to rewrite history? And so you see him struggle with that. You see him trying to figure out what he's going to do with this whole situation. And I'm telling you guys, when I read this book, I read it on my Kindle because it is a huge, huge book, but I could not put it down. I remember we were living in Tucson when I read it. I think we read it for a book club. And I was like cleaning the kitchen or something. And I had my Kindle in my hand and I was like rubbing the same spot on the counter for like 10 minutes because I could not put it down. It was so good. And it shocked me how good it was. And like, it's a book, even though it's this big, I would reread that book in a heartbeat. I would actually really like to reread that book. And it's just such a different writing experience from Stephen King. So if you're a fan of Stephen King and you haven't read this one, I would definitely give it a try because it's a little bit different, but he does it so well. And I absolutely loved it. And I love that it's in a historical setting and it's based on real events that really happened. It's awesome. The next one I would like to recommend is Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. This one, okay, this is a hard one because this is a book that completely broke my heart and sent me down a huge rabbit hole of doing research on these people and what was happening. So this follows a orphanage set in Tennessee, and it is an orphanage of children who are being adopted out to very wealthy families. And they are also, while they're at this orphanage, they are abused by the owner and the staff, and they are not treated well. And then they are later basically sold. If you want to get down to it, they're sold to wealthy people, wealthy families. And you're following two different timelines. So you're following a timeline at the orphanage and what's happening there. And then you're also following a timeline of a woman who realizes that her family was part of this and that she's doing some research and, trying to figure out what exactly happened at this orphanage and how her family was affected by it. So you're kind of going back and forth a little bit. And here's the thing though. The woman who ran this orphanage, her name was Georgia Tan. She was a real person and this really happened. And that was the hardest part for me to stomach about this book because this is a historical fiction, but this really did happen. And Georgia Tan was real and she did this and she had judges in her pocket that let her get away with this. The woman was actually stealing children. So they weren't even really orphans. She was stealing beautiful children, like think blonde hair, blue eyes, to make them more appealing to the wealthy and making money that way. She was stealing babies from hospitals. She was stealing children off the street. I kid you not, you guys, like all of this really happened. And I wanted to throw up multiple times reading this book because just knowing that it was real and that this really happened to some families, I can't even fathom that actually happened. And it did. And man, the research I did on this was stomach churning, but also really enlightening and just wow. So this is a hard one. So you kind of have to go into it with a little bit of knowledge that's going to be very hard to read, but it was very, very good. The last one I want to recommend in the adult age range is Hum If You Don't Know the Words. This is by Bianca Murray. And this one follows a time frame in Africa, and it's during the apartheid. So there is a lot of government and political conflict at this time. And we are following a young girl. Her family is living in South Africa. They are white. They have a woman who is living with them part-time and helping around the house and helping with the kids and kind of a housekeeper, if you will, and she is Black. And so you are seeing what is happening in the country with the government and with political leaders and with the citizens, because the citizens are starting to uprise and starting to fight back and starting to protest. And the daughter of the housekeeper goes missing, and she is a big part of these political protests. And so she is getting very nervous about the safety of her daughter and whether or not she's alive. She thinks she could either be missing, or she could have been kidnapped, or she could be dead. She doesn't know. And so she leaves to go and try to find her daughter. And you see how this housekeeper and the young girl that she is caring for team up to try to find her daughter and try to figure out what happened to her. And it's all set around this really tumultuous time frame in South Africa. And man, when I tell you the writing was so beautiful in this book, it really was. It really transported me there. I felt like I was there. I felt like I was in the middle of it. And I cared about these characters so much. I cared about their well-being. I cared about characters I hadn't even met yet. I cared about the daughter of the housekeeper who I didn't even know. And it really was a transportive book. And I loved it. I loved it. It was so beautiful. And it just made me feel so much. I almost felt anxious reading it as well because of how tumultuous the climate was at the time. And all of that is true. Like, this is based off of a real time in South Africa's history and what was happening there. And it was just, it was a lot, but it was just so beautifully written, and really just the descriptions of the country and what was happening was just so good. Okay, guys, those are some recommendations for me from different age ranges from historical fiction. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know. And if you have any other recommendations that you want to recommend for any of the 3 age ranges, please let me know down below as well. And I know that there's a lot that I could have said here as well. These are just kind of ones that I have personally read and that really stood out to me over time. And I would love to hear what you guys have enjoyed with historical fiction in any type of age range. Doesn't matter. Let me know down below. And I will talk to you guys again soon. Hope you have a great day. Bye.